All right, there we go. So yeah, this week's program is What's Holding Us Back on Climate Change. Matt has attended a few of our programs so far and reached out to me about one recently. And he wanted to talk about kind of New Jersey's doing a lot on climate change, but we obviously all know that there's a lot that still needs to be done, and it's not necessarily getting done at the pace that you would maybe hope that it would. Aside from the things we all know are blocking climate change or progress on climate change, he wanted to talk about what deeper but questionable assumptions we hold about the way the world works that can make us get in our way. I'm assuming a lot of you know Matt because he sounded like he had a lot of colleagues on here, but he's been a sustainability change agent for almost 45 years. He has extensive sustainability experience working for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where he was a sustainability team leader and the co-catalyst for the first work on climate change. He's done work for 2 local governments. He's worked with Sustainable Jersey for environmental groups. He was a senior fellow for 12 years at FDU's Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, and he focuses on helping groups and key individuals understand sustainability more deeply. He's won 19 sustainability awards or resolutions. He's a perpetual student. He has a BA in psychology from Rutgers, an MBA in economics, and an MA in Humanities and Social Thought from NYU. And he is in the Sustainability Ph.D. program at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Please feel free to pop stuff in the chat if you need to.
Thank you, Matt. This is a great privilege for me to do this. I don't do very many public talks anymore. I just finished teaching a course where I gave 14 at NJIT, but have been less and less with the public. So who knows how many more there'll be after this. But this is a good one. I've been looking forward to this. I think one of the promotional pieces gave me a PhD, so I'm treating that as an honorary PhD until I actually earn one. I'll take it. I don't know what it gets me, but I guess if I had any library fines at the Red Bank Library, you guys should waive them. You might as well load it when we can get started. I can promise you that this is going to be a different kind of presentation in a number of ways. I mean, the topic, we're going to do some inside baseball. We'll be talking about some psychology, and I noted that Matt mentioned that he had done a session on eco-anxiety, which I probably wasn't going to bring up, but there's 2 or 3 social workers and psychologists on this call, so they might be interested in bringing it up from their end, or Matt might want to do it later. Okay, we might as well start. What's holding us back on climate change? And I'm going to be asking Matt to handle the slides from his end. So one less thing I have to do here. So far, so good. I'm visible. I'm hearable. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, next slide. I just had this new thought recently. I started returning to synagogue services after decades away and noting certain things, like the special prayer for the dead. And it got me thinking that when I do these talks, it's probably a good thing that I mention very, very briefly people who I've worked with over the decades who, real sustainability pioneers who are no longer with us. I'm pretty sure most of you didn't know most of them. I don't have time to talk about too many, but maybe I'll mention a little tiny something about Carl Henn, because it's kind of fits in a way. He was former military, but as interested in sustainability as I was. I guess he was in his 70s back 20 years ago. And he was a true innovator on sustainability, knew a lot of the literature, would go to a lot of public hearings, would talk to kids. But one of the neat things about him is because he had that military background, whenever we were at the same, usually government public hearing together, he would come to me and say, is there anything that I want to say that maybe it isn't the best thing for me as a then government employee to say, a little bit too out there, which I sometimes do. And so I would tell him, Carl, say this. And he always would raise his hand and he would have the floor. And whoever was running the meeting would have to listen respectfully to something that at the time they probably had never heard before. A way to plant a seed in a way that probably would have been more difficult for me. And it's a lesson I recently passed on to my students. Just at the very end, a typo I almost made, and I caught myself at the last minute, but I think it's kind of funny. At the very end there, I said, is there anyone I missed? Well, the earlier version of this said, anyone missed? And I was thinking, something's wrong there. Oh no, it says the opposite of what I was trying to get at. And later on in this talk, I'll be talking about a lot about mindset barriers. And one of them is that we often think that opposites are really opposites. And if you look hard and creatively at it, you find that they're not. And if you have a premise of this talk is that if you look at reality, more accurately, it opens up opportunities for discussions, sharing ideas, and so forth. So the point there is that opposites are not necessarily opposite. But if I had not caught that typo, in some cases, it's the opposite of what I intended to say. So the point here is that sometimes opposites really are opposites, because I do miss all of these people very, very much. They helped me during some early tough years. Let's move on. Okay, this talk is based on my personal history. Frankly, a lot of the projects I was involved with in sustainability, the biggies, some other ones, they failed. And it got me thinking at this point in my life, why? And each one was a little bit individualized. It had its own specific reasons, but I think there were certain common denominators that became the basis of my PhD work. So in the PhD work, I've been studying large social change, certain European-oriented fields I spent some time in, although I think I'm going past them, called sustainable transformation and sustainable transition, did some early articles, presentations, caught the reactions, made some modifications. I'm only going to bring up pieces of that in this particular talk. Other roots of this talk, like I'm sure a lot of you, I'm noticing a lot of messaging and reliance on the young, like the young, we're handing it off a charge to them. And there's good reasons for that, and so forth. But at the same time, I don't think we're telling them everything that I feel they need to know, because the last thing we want is for them to make some of the same old mistakes. So I think it's important, particularly at this time, for all of us and myself at this point in my life, to try to pass on some of the sometimes very painful lessons learned. By the way, I'm not going to always have time to read, to discuss everything on every slide. I'm going to have to pick and choose, but hopefully the PowerPoint will be available later for anybody who wants to go deeper. But it is important that to point out that I had this feeling that we're missing something. It's very common in our field, or environmentalism, which we kind of built on, and it's still interspersed with sustainability. There's a lot of villains and a lot of entities, large corporations, the Koch brothers, and so forth, who are actively fighting these efforts. We all know that, it comes up all the time, but that's not where my focus is. It's accurate, and it's relevant, but it's not where I'm going. It's not my niche. And what I feel is missing is also missing from the leaders of the field as well. And it's makes things more difficult to do what I do and others do, which is to present new ideas. If for whatever reason ideas are getting blocked because gatekeepers, whether at government or nonprofits or even academia, just are not hearing them, or people don't know what they don't know, we're not going to have the discussions that we need to have. For some reason, I've just, in my experience, the state is not particularly friendly to new ideas. Next slide, please. This was, again, my personal history. I've been following and involved with climate change for a long time, and I saw patterns. Again, this is another root of where I am now. I came into state government at the very end of the Kane years, and I left about a year after the McGreevy became governor. And there always seemed to be more or less a pattern. When I came in, I don't know where this came about because I had inherited it, but the feeling was, okay, we can do climate change, but only internally within government. We're not going to involve any other part of New Jersey. Then a colleague of mine and myself, Mike Alcott, we felt we needed to get in the game. But we spoke to an assistant commissioner. Now, this may sound crazy now. Well, it was crazy to us even then, but climate change is not a New Jersey issue. But if you guys want to go for federal funding to do a carbon emissions inventory, hey, we'll take the money. And that's where it all began. So the administrations, came and left. In general, with one exception, during the Christie years, they moved forward. But again, it was slow. There was always something blocking them. There was a step. Okay, we can encourage others outside of state government to do climate change actions, but it only voluntarily, and they were only going to do it if it was cost effective from their own perspective. That is, if it saved them money. And we focused on partners, business, colleges, faith groups. And that was the limit of what we did. Then somehow the commissioner, who was Shin at the time, convinced his boss, Christy Whitman, okay, we can be a little more aggressive on climate change, but we couldn't use that word, or we couldn't say global warming. We could say sea level rise, and never say retreat. That's the idea that we're going to have to pull back from the shore. Around that same time, a Rutgers geologist said retreat is absolutely necessary, and we weren't going to touch that. Then later on, still Commissioner Shin at the time felt we needed a more ambitious goal, but in my view, he didn't want to tick off anyone. Now, I should say at the same time, there wasn't a lot of interest in climate change in the public. Even the environmental groups really had not pressured us on it. And to a large degree, government responds to pressure. So he felt, okay, let's get in the game. Let's go beyond where any state was at the time, as strange as that might sound now with these numbers. But let's pick half the Kyoto goal of a 7% reduction in carbon, and we'll make that our goal. So we'll shoot for 3.5%. And we worked with various groups in the state on a plan to get there. So we were getting further into the game. And then during, I guess it was the McGreevy, no, I guess it was the Corzine era, that's right, before McGreevy, we had a pretty pioneering law, the Global Warming Response Act, with a very radical, bold carbon reduction goal of 80% by 2050. We didn't have a clue of how we were going to make it, but we were in the game. We also did other things, including we were part of the RGGI, carbon permit system that only covered electric utilities. It was technically a limited carbon tax, although we didn't use that term. A few other things. Then the Christie years were not such fun. We moved backwards. I attended a meeting of DEP Science Advisory Group. That pioneering law, the Global Warming Response Act, didn't even come up until I opened my big mouth and said, folks, we have policy here, which was, I think, a surprise to the scientists in the room. And now we have an administration who, we may want them to do more and so forth, and I do, and a few other things, but in many, many ways, they are very, very bold and are doing some very nice things. So I will give them credit at this point in the presentation. And I guess I'm asking, what does this tell me? What does this tell you? It seemed like, there was always some mental barrier. So you can do this, but you can't do that. And looking back, a lot of these things were very artificial. There was no reason that the restriction had to be that particular restriction. We could have been bolder, except maybe for the Global Warming Response Act, but something stopped us. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on the context of climate change. There's all different ways to do this. I'm assuming you guys have seen the headlines. You've seen the scary pictures, and they are scary. The good news, bad news is at least we have very ambitious goals. Some people belittle goals, but hey, they were a long time coming, not just in New Jersey, but internationally, nationally. We all know what we went through with the last administration. It's nice to see our current president getting us so strongly in the game. Again, he's not perfect, but he's very good. So this is the good news. So I may get critical later, but I want to acknowledge we have made good progress. It is doable. Bad news, yeah. At current rates of fossil fuel use, we only have about 11 years left before we reach a critical threshold of 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we don't have a lot of time. This is a direct challenge to a lot of, I think, the mental, I'll get into this later, the mindset that we have basically forever to get our act together. No, we don't, and that has implications. At the same time, we keep discovering new sources of methane, which is even worse than carbon. We're undercounting. Certain countries are undercounting their carbon emissions. Glaciers are melting even faster than were projected. And we know, both in theory and what we're seeing in Washington, that not all planned strategies will work. It's silly to think they will. The president is having a lot of time getting his latest carbon policies through the Congress. At best, it may be very piecemeal looking ahead. So we're going to have to come up with new strategies, plan Bs, plan Cs, and I would not at all be surprised if these goals on the top of this page are going to have to be moved up. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about unexpected barriers, mindsets, and what I call mindset barriers. The first one is other people, including some on this call, have worked a little bit in that area. The second, I think I invented. And I'm going to be going back and forth between those unexpected barriers, basically things we do to ourselves, doesn't really have a villain, along, and some of the particular climate change initiatives that link to them. Okay, and the good news is, always good to throw in some good news, they can be overcome. And I've seen some of them overcome. Don't quite know what went right, but I'll take it good news where I can find it. And I'll show you some examples of that shortly. Next slide. Quickly, this is my own experience. Others who were during those times probably had other things they thought were going on. This is going to be, this, as you can tell already, this is an idea-oriented talk. There's some philosophy in it. I know that's not everybody's thing, but I also will be practicing some of their opposites. I will get into a section on actions, and I may get a little silly at times. I hope nobody minds too much. I have at least one video, maybe two to show you, depending on the time. A lot of cartoons, pictures. And this is also kind of what I call a meta lesson. Again, one of the mindset barriers, actually two, is there are people who will advocate what is called both-and thinking. When you're faced with difficult choices, typically we defer to it's either choice A or choice B. Well, it's pretty fundamental to sustainability, although we tend to forget it, that actually it might be possible to do both. And the one I cited earlier, that opposites are not necessarily opposites. So this is kind of like an example of putting into practice, overcoming these mindset barriers. I can be idea-oriented, but I also could bring in actions. I could be serious, I could be silly. Another caveat, I can't claim I'm up on everything happening in the state anymore. So I might be missing some things. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll go for the silly section before I get serious. And some of these visuals do have a backstory I may or may not get to. Okay, so we're more in the mindset area, problematic mindsets, and I'll define those a little bit later. But one would be, okay, tree climbing is just for children. So there's a picture of me back in time helping my two sons to climb a tree. And perfectly fine, kids climb trees. Next slide. Well, maybe tree climbing is not just for kids, especially if they couldn't figure it out 27 years earlier. They got there. And although it's not clear from the picture, I've actually climbed it myself, and I'm standing 5 feet off the ground. I hope you don't let me get away with that claim. Next slide. Oh, I guess a backstory there, although I'm not sure it's related to tree climbing, is the role of a father or a parent never ends, even when your kids are older. Anyway, here's one I got from my mother-in-law. One of the things she informed me that I didn't agree with: naps are a sign of weakness. But if you're going to do one, you know, you do it by yourself and you use a good pillow. Well, not in our house. So hopefully you can see that. It's a little blurry at my end. In my house, we take a lot of naps. My wife has come to the dark side on that one too. And our animals tend to be our pillows, or we're our pillows for the animals. Next slide. I think we're about to get more serious now. Okay, mindsets, definitions, implications, characteristics. Okay, a mindset, a fixed mental attitude and disposition that predetermines a person's response and interpretation of situations. It's a pretty sweeping idea, and there's a number of synonyms. It's close to worldview, mental model, and so forth. It's very hard to change, and they tend not to encourage their own questioning. I mean, people who have a mindset, we probably all do on certain things. It's not like it comes with any encouragement. Oh, by the way, you may be limiting yourself. It may be preventing you from seeing things that are outside your mindset. So I thought I would show this 2.5-minute video and see, I guess it'll have to be a chat box function. What, if anything, you think it tells us for direction? Oh, I'm sorry. Matt, can you see if you can play that link? This is a trailer from the movie Flatland. Are you getting sound? You'll need the sound.
Sorry, I think I had myself on mute. I'm going to restart it. There we go.
Imagine a vast plane, a world of only 2 dimensions, on which triangles, squares, pentagons, and other figures live and move freely about.
Configuration makes the man. Calculate.
Get to your squaricle! Now!
You're only a square. Thanks, brother.
They know nothing of our 3-dimensional world.
Such a notion is, of course, absurd and furthermore illegal.
But that's all about to change.
Where did you come from?
I come from space, the 3rd dimension.
No, you're not serious.
Based on the beloved novel by Edwin A. Abbott.
Tonight our world faces a grave threat.
I can prove there is another dimension to space that is upward.
That's so hard to imagine. But wouldn't that be amazing?
My own infinite universe of 0 dimensions. Wonderful. We're going to be truncated. Oh, not that angle.
I came to reveal the truth of the 3rd dimension, no more.
Oh!
Dude, you're freaking me out!
What exactly is a dimension?
Mathematics, reason, and imagination will help reveal the truth.
Flatland, the movie.
The third dimension is real.
Thank you, Matt. We could end that now. We'll see if anybody wants to pick up on that later. But, you know, to me, it helps in an amusing way show how blind a society, it isn't just an individual, how blind a society could be. And it's not like there's an obvious villain. And it takes, and here's where it gets mysterious, and I don't have a lot of answers. It takes something to get people past that mindset and to see its limitations. And one could say, well, wait a minute, I'm making it sound like mindsets are all bad and you can avoid them. And I don't think I'm saying that. I think you can't avoid having one. I'm not sure the world would work for any of us if we didn't have a mindset. The question is, how do we make sure that it's an accurate one, or it's self improving? And can mindsets be a good thing? And coincidentally, I just put this slide in recently. Isabel Ramanasi had written a book, The Sustainability Mindset, which I kind of look at as a complement and a bit of overlap with my work. Isabel is trying to create and develop a mindset that's actually very positive, and she's aiming for education, where I'm pointing out mindsets that can be negative. And so forth. And looking into some of her work, there is some commonality, and I'm trying to learn from some of her ideas. And coincidentally, I got an email today that she actually today just published her second book on the sustainability mindset for educators. So just a suggestion that maybe it's not such a bad thing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, switching to something a little different, but not totally different, mindset barriers. They're less sweeping. They tend to be assumptions that maybe they were true at one point, maybe they're still part true, but they're dated, they're incomplete, and they're getting in our way. And there is a lot of them. And kind of like, you know, the mindsets, we're not necessarily aware of them. We're not aware that they're problems, and they may be holding us back. And similar to mindsets, they have a lot of close synonyms. You know, dogma in the academic world, where I spend part of my time these days, they have their own versions of them. Cognitive traps, sticking points. You know, we know them sometimes as blind spots. Groupthink, which I'll talk about in a second, self-delusion. Basically, again, one way to look at this is ways that we fool ourselves. And I'm trying to make a distinction. This is not the same thing as making a human error, like getting the math wrong. That's very, very different. Although in practice, some of these things can be a little bit gray. And when I did an article on this a couple of years ago, I had counted over 100, and I think I've stopped counting at this point. So they're very pervasive. I'll give you some more examples of them later. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to start giving you a list of some specific ones. Okay, there's little to be learned from other parts of the world, particularly Europe. I had done an article with then Commissioner Shin on how New Jersey could help parts of the rest of the world understand sustainability and climate change, and in turn, how we could learn from them. I kind of thought, okay, you write an article, it's published, you're on your way. Not exactly. There seems to be an unquestioned assumption that, and there's exceptions, but New Jersey is an island. Municipalities are their own islands. If they do their thing using traditional means, they'll be okay. And there's a related one. I believe I also came across too many times. And from a perspective of ideas, there are no ideas. We've already seen everything there is. And you might imagine it makes it very hard to say, I might have something new for you to consider. You'll just get nowhere. Next slide. You may have seen this one or versions of this. I interpret this as the way a lot of us think. We're doing okay. It's the other part, the people on the other part of the boat that have problems. We're safe. I think that one speaks for itself. We're safe, but we're safe on a very temporary basis. Next slide. But this one, first good news on this, some of these mindsets have been overcome. Last fall, Rutgers did a conference with the German embassy to the US on learning from each other. So I did a poster for it called a personal learning bridge. How Europe, we could learn from Europe and Germany and to some degree vice versa. Next slide. So part of my poster, I came up with 5 things that I thought Germany and other countries in Europe were doing very, very well that we were not. I'm not saying they're perfect by any means. The one in the middle was, some of you might be familiar with this, but I don't think most of you are. We do our little biking, like where I live, it's almost non-existent. Maybe it's where you guys live, it's somewhat better. But you just have to see it to believe it. When I was in the Netherlands, where my university is, it's like absolutely incredible. So now that particular picture comes from Germany. I was visiting an old friend from Rutgers who lives there now, and he sent that one to me. It's all over the place. My hope is that seeing it could overcome the mindset that, yeah, biking is nice, but it's very, very limited. Not so limited there. Yeah, they might have some advantages. They might be flatter than, I live in a very hilly area, but wow, it is doable. The far left, this is no secret. Their train system is not perfect. I made my share of mistakes, but it is so amazing how you can get from one place to the next, in most cases, by train. The one on the bottom right, I know Jersey's made some progress on this one with banning paper bags and plastic bags later this year, although I'm still half expecting a backlash once it kicks in. But when I was in the Netherlands on this one, and I hadn't really realized it yet, and so I was expecting a bag, and they said, "You didn't bring your own? Sorry." And I had to improvise. But there was like, everyone else brought a bag, and there was no fighting. People just got used to bringing a bag. The one on the bottom left, it's a form of architecture where they've learned to go with the flow when it comes to rising water. Those homes are built on skids. So an area where some interesting architecture might be helpful going forward. The one on the far right, I need to spend a few minutes on. There is a secret in New Jersey and the US that there is a major United Nations initiative called the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 sweeping goals that all members of the UN are supposed to be subscribing to. Climate change is one of 17. And for the most part, I know very few people who have even heard of them. And they're already, I think, 3 or 4 years old. Whereas there, it's fairly, in Germany, Europe, it's fairly common knowledge, and they at least are giving thought to how they're meeting those goals and doing progress reports on whether they are or they're not. Here, we don't even know about it. Technically, though, we're supposed to be trying to meet them, but how do you meet things that you don't even know about? Okay, so in some way, we overcame that mindset that there's nothing to be learned from Europe. So that's good news. Next slide. How are we doing on time? Okay, I was at a webinar last week. The Musconetcong Watershed Association put a webinar on a climate change model. It was a pretty nice model. It enabled any of us to actually play with different strategies and to get a sense of a rough mathematical sense of what could they do for us. 5% reduction, 0.5% reduction, and they had quite a few there. And it wasn't just limited to that. You could go deeper and find, okay, this is the pros of this particular strategy. These are the negatives. So they didn't necessarily know this, but they had overcome 6 mindset barriers. One, and I know this because I worked for a watershed association for 7 years after I left DEP, they don't do climate change. And if it comes up, it's superficial. No, they are now in that game, and it is not superficial. Models tend to be thought of only as useful for experts. Well, no, we were not experts. And in the course of the strategies that we were brainstorming with, which is again another thing that you don't typically see with models, but they can encourage a necessary brainstorming. We both criticized certain businesses that deserved it, and we praised others that were doing good things. And that often isn't done in that area. Also, certain things you don't tend to talk about in environmental circles. This might be new to you, but this one kind of like almost broke the Sierra Club apart a few years ago. They started talking about population as an issue, and people may have old memories from the population bomb days of Paul Ehrlich and so forth. And the conventional wisdom that I often see when population comes up in the Washington Post or the New York Times is he was wrong. Population was disproven to be a problem, and other people have picked up on that in different ways. And anyway, it's just too damn controversial. We don't want to go there. Yet the model had picked up population. So we can talk about it. And someday we're going to have to talk about it. So good news, it can be done. Next slide, please. I think I better speed it up a little bit. Okay, pretty fundamental. It comes up explicitly in early economics, but it comes up in some other fields too. We're basically rational creatures, and we make our decisions on input consistent with our inherent rationality, facts, numbers, data, logic. It's a huge part of economics, science, math, and to some degree, some of these other fields. But, you know, these days in particular, with what we've been through and are going through, you have to question, are we really rational? Are we somewhat rational? Does it depend on certain circumstances? And some might say, not most, if we're not fully rational, maybe that's okay too. So I'm just questioning these things now. But now it gets more interesting in the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is from Marcus Liu. His name got cut off here. When I looked at what are called cognitive biases a few years ago, there was like 14, then there was 20, and now there's 50 recognized cognitive biases. Now, I should say earlier when I said there's over 100 mindset barriers I've identified, I was only counting cognitive biases as one, but there's actually 50 of them identified now. You've probably heard of confirmation bias, which is the idea that people tend to only pay attention to sources that they know they're going to agree with, which makes it very hard to learn what the other side is thinking and potentially at least understand it better and maybe even agree to it to some degree. We kind of structurally don't allow that to happen. That isn't even on here. That's probably the best known one. Looking at groupthink, I was a little bit surprised that none of my classes had heard about it, but they did readily understand it. I even showed one of them some scenes from the movie 12 Angry Men that showed groupthink very, very clearly. The particular definition here I don't really like. It's not wrong, but it's incomplete. The definition, due to a desire for conformity and harmony in the group, we make irrational decisions to avoid conflict. I think the larger definition is that somebody in that room, like really happened in that movie strongly, they knew, or what happened in the shuttle accident that killed a number of astronauts some years ago, they knew it was wrong. And they either shut up or they made their argument and then they backed off and terrible things happened. So that is a fairly well-known example of a cognitive bias. And again, there's 50 of these guys. Probably more will be identified. So it really brings into question this idea of how rational are we? Next slide, please. Another one, and we don't necessarily use these words, but we tend to, consistent with the last one, we tend to think that linear thinking, going from A to B to C, is the way life should work and does work. And kind of similar to that is something that's come up in some of my circles, the idea of the planning cycle. You know, you plan, you execute, you learn, you adjust, and then improve. And I'm not going to say it's wrong. Where I'm going with this is it has its value, but it's linear thinking. And okay, so what does the next slide tell us? What did Mike Tyson say about planning? Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. So planning has its negatives too. Next slide. I played with linear thinking and nonlinear thinking in a presentation to my PhD professors. I was trying to make a case that, you know, there is a role for nonlinear thinking also. And maybe, you know, this idea of being a little more creative, out of the box, less from A to B to C and more. Well, I don't quite know where I'm going yet, but I'll get there. I'll get there. So I had 2 or 3 slides on that one. That was the first one. Next one, please. Again, part of my argument to my professors, you know, again, stop making me be so linear. I know I eventually have to be linear, but not quite yet. I'm not quite ready yet. And if you just let me do some nonlinear, or let's call it lateral thinking, I think I'll come up with a better product. I'll get past that wall in a more creative, more effective way that might be a little bit hard to see right now. Then the third slide, the next one, please. I maybe pushed my luck a little bit too much. And my professor, my main advisor, caught me and said, Matt, too much of a good thing, maybe. And he was right. Next slide. So this one, I think, tells us a number of things. That, you know, maybe later people could tell me what they think it's telling them. But I think a lot of us spend time in that cube, and we're doing our linear thinking. But some troublemaker happened to open the door to the cube, and oh. I don't know that the world actually looks this way. Next slide. Okay, so if you're in this field for very long, and maybe we haven't told the young people this enough, but you're probably going to get punched in the mouth. So, you know, be prepared, have a good cut person, but maybe there's a place, again, for both linear thinking or planning and some of these other qualities also. Maybe we need both. Again, that's a common, you know, meta theme to a lot of what I'm saying today. Next slide. I don't think I'm going to have time for this one too much, maybe later. All right, comic books are a waste of time. I remember when I was like 11, my mother threw out all my comic books. I don't think I've gotten over that today. But I recently was watching the final episode of Supergirl, and to my great surprise, Supergirl and her friends, quote unquote, solved a very difficult problem I was wrestling with in my PhD. So if we can squeeze in 4.5 minutes at some point, I'd like to show it to you, because again, there's also a backstory that's very relevant here too. So let's skip this video for now and see how we're doing with time later. But if we don't get to it, you at least have the URL if you want to watch it yourself. Next slide. Okay, this is one you've probably all seen at some point in your life. My students did not. I was a little surprised. I don't remember thinking too much about it when I was a kid. I just kind of absorbed it. I suppose if I thought about it, it was showing how early man, and it was men at the time, were getting stronger, straighter, smarter, better, and the trend lines were all going forward. So to some degree, I suppose that made an impression on a lot of us in terms of what we thought of ourselves, our species. Next slide. Great artwork too. Okay, so well, there's been a few changes to what we might today call a meme. Yeah, we're moving in this direction, but nonlinear thinking, we're about to get in a lot of trouble. And there's versions of this where Homer Simpson is the final climax here. Okay, so it's a different way, a different mindset here. Maybe comics have greater potential than we realize. Next slide. Oops, that got twisted. This one you may have seen. I'm gonna have to twist myself. Okay, the first one, who wants change? Everybody wants change, which is a little bit of an exaggeration. Okay, but who actually will change? Themselves. Nobody wants to. So again, this gets to maybe we're not, putting our money where our mouth is, and I'm calling that a mindset barrier. Okay, next slide. Okay, this one is too close for comfort. The line here for the person who will tell you the absolute truth, but it's not too much fun, versus the one who'll tell you what you want to hear. And for those of you who've seen the new movie, Don't Look Up, which the critics have different views about, but my wife and I found it, very scary, and it hit a little bit too close to home. Another mindset barrier. Maybe we say we want the truth, but we really don't. And somehow we have to get past that. Next one. This one's a little trickier. Again, I sometimes hear, and I don't disagree with it, but I'm saying, well, it's a little limiting. It doesn't really, we can do better. At least some of us, if everyone would just do their share, we'll be okay. Well, it certainly would be a major improvement. But one of the reasons I teach from time to time is because I'm trying to identify that the subset of my class that has the power to be the next Greta. And I want to give them some clues, some tools that they might be able to do more than their share. They may have it within them to be Greta 2, Greta 3, but somebody needs to tell them that and give them some tools and ideas on how they might try to do that. So the idea here is that, okay, they'll have to do it in their own way, but they are finding a leverage point, kind of like Greta invented her own leverage point. Next slide. Okay, part good news. Some people out there would say, okay, you've part convinced me. I will do some measure to address climate change, but only if it's in my interest. I'm still seeing the world through my interest, whether it's economic or it's health or it's recreation. Yeah, I see it's hurting me. I'll do something. And this one I also hit my students with. Well, there are different ways to look at what our interest is. We don't have to just accept one that seems to be surrounding us. It's pure self-interest. We can have an interest in the welfare of others. It isn't so crazy. So there's that idea of Ubuntu, which means a number of things, but this one is my favorite. Basically saying, I can't be happy, I can't be contented if you're miserable. Your misery affects me. We need to be happy and successful together. So I'm suggesting we can use a lot more Ubuntu as opposed to pure, even enlightened self-interest. Next slide. Ooh, we're really running low. Okay. I often heard in my business and my government years, and I ran a government initiative on this. And our thing was we need to measure everything. We need to know how we're doing. And if you can't measure it, you shouldn't do it. And it troubled me back when I was running this initiative. I thought about it after I left and developed my thinking, and I wrote 21 articles on it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't measure things, and I don't have time for this one, but it comes with its own issues. It kind of started with, I think, with K through 12 education. They needed to measure, core learning and so forth. Some of you may be more familiar with that. There was a number of backfiring to doing that, cheating, maybe measurement and education don't really go together well, and so forth. So again, both measure, but be a little bit critical about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and some of the backfiring it might lead to, so you can avoid it. Again, a major mindset barrier. Measure, measure, measure. Next slide. There's again a lot of them. I have to go through this very quickly. Many people in our world have very negative views on businesses. I work with Kent, who's on this call, for many years, working with businesses who actually, to various degrees and with various motives, were trying to do the right thing, even when they stumbled. And I always thought that had tremendous potential. But even to this day, we don't seem to even know about it. I wrote a comment on an article today, since the Supreme Court put the kibosh on the president's plan to have large businesses have vaccine mandates for their employees. My comment was, at least ask them to do it voluntarily, and you might be surprised how many agree to do it. We talk about green jobs a lot, but we tend to limit it to very few sectors. Obviously solar, maybe energy efficiency, and a few others. A few of us back in the days when I worked with Kent thought, why can't just about any sector, I don't know so much about fossil fuels, but almost any other sector, why can't it be green? Why can't the people working at those non-renewable energy companies be sustainable? Innovation to this day is often just seen as applicable to technology. But actually, if you look in some of the literature, it's applied to many, many other things. And we don't seem to know what we don't know. I really need to speed it up. Government does not necessarily respond to correspondence about some of these ideas, and that is a big problem. Going down this list here, I think all of us experience curiosity and the feeling of awe as children. It probably came natural. A lot of us have lost it, and we don't seem to think that's a problem, and I think it is. Let's move on. Next slide, please. There's a lot more. Sequestration, I used to teach about it in class at a different college, and other professors thought it didn't really have a role. We shouldn't be talking about sequestration. That's the idea of taking carbon that's already in the atmosphere and putting it somewhere where it'll stay safe for a long time. They felt that, basically we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. If you're going to talk about sequestration, it's going to divert attention from reducing carbon. And again, I thought both. Jevons paradox is interesting. It has other names. I'm not claiming it's always applicable, but you at least need to consider it. That's the idea that if you increase efficiency of your appliances, of your cars, of your homes, at a certain point, it could kick back because you're saving so much money that you wind up buying something else. The classical example is if you buy a new energy efficient fridge, you actually, contrary to what people expected, you take your old fridge and you put it in the basement and store beer in it. So your energy use actually goes up. If we know this and can talk about it, we might be able to overcome it, but we don't. Whole big subject I don't have time for, but I wrote a bunch of articles on this too. No point trying to talk to conservatives about these issues. They just don't care. They're not interested. And besides, we don't need them to address those goals, but I believe we do. Don't talk about changes to lifestyle. Never talk about inconvenience. The public will not accept it. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's got to be challenged. Next slide. Very, very quickly. This one is getting at that people are very certain about what they know. They don't necessarily doubt themselves too much. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong. There are times when we really do know what we think we know. And I'm not vouching for the math, the approximate math, but this was one person's view, breaking knowledge into all these different pieces. And I think they missed a few things that we know we're sure about, but are wrong. Things that we don't know, things we have forgotten. So I'm suggesting that we need to get more sophisticated about what we mean by knowing. And my next slide, please. My very minuscule way of trying to do that. So this is one of the two shirts I bought and had written on it. So anyone who sees me, hopefully I'm planting a seed. This is, what if I'm wrong? What if they're wrong about something? Next slide. I don't think that's going to work on a large scale though, but maybe I'll get a few people. So a big question for my thesis, and I don't have any great answers yet. I do have some speculative ones. How do we change mindsets and overcome mindset barriers quickly and at a wide level, not just one person by one person, which we'll do if we have nothing better, but I'm afraid we don't have time to do it one by one. Okay, if you have any great answers, make sure you get them to me. Next slide. Very quickly on this, because I promised it. So leaving mindsets and mindset barriers, what are some of the things we could be doing that we're not doing? It frustrates me enormously that ideas like green design have been out there for a long time. We even had one of its pioneers, Bill McDonough, come to New Jersey a couple of times to give talks to select groups. Some of my students at NJIT, I knew about him, but it's like a secret. This is a way to design our products and our processes right from the beginning so that they're sustainable. Therefore, you don't have to worry so much about what happens to them later. We keep it as a secret, whereas I think we should have an institute in New Jersey that works with businesses on this kind of thing. Much greater biking, I actually talked about that. We should be using some social science if we're going to be asking people to make a lot of changes to their behavior. And although we don't necessarily put it that way, we really are, and we'll be doing more of it. So shouldn't we know what the obstacles are to changing behavior and try to do something about it? So we're really going to need that element more. Education, I should speak about. In my view, it's often treated like, everybody's pro-education. So of course, nobody's against it, which is not 100% true, but it tends to be a little bit superficial. It's too important to keep it superficial. There's some concepts I've learned, unlearning, back to that earlier graph. What is it that we think we know that we're wrong about? We better unlearn it. Learning together, double loop and triple loop learning challenge the question. If you're in a group in an organization and you're told to do X, you come back and you say, I don't think X is even the appropriate way to look at this problem. I think we need to try for something very, very different. You'll still solve your problem, but you'll solve it in a much better way. We need to make students much more aware of certain roles that they could play. We don't even talk, in my experience, they don't even know when I ask them, do you know that you can be a social entrepreneur when you grow up? What's a social entrepreneur? There's journals on it now. Let's move on. Okay. Let's hold off on this and definitely get back to it. So 3 things you could input to once we can hear you all. Any ideas on overcoming big picture mindset problems? Any ideas on overcoming any of the specific mindset barriers, or leaving that area, something just like, and I promise, we're also going to be more practical, action oriented. Is there anything else we should be doing in your view? Preferably something that we're not doing, or we're doing a tiny bit, but we should be ratcheting it up. Let's definitely get back to this one, but let me just finish the last few. Next slide, please. I have to do this one very quickly. Conclusions, recommendations. We just can't delegate responsibility to the young. Okay, we're out of it. Up to you now. It's your future. It's your world. Good luck. We have to offer help and mentorship. No guarantee they'll take it. Urgency has to mean something. And this gets back to the early part of my thesis work. We don't necessarily know this, but most of what we do in this area are small, incremental, sometimes baby steps, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need them. One could even claim that you do enough baby steps and it adds up to something transformational, but some people have to go for the whole enchilada. Some people have to think big and try for the big changes. You really need them both. We need to somehow figure out how to be more reflective about our assumptions, more open to ideas. Again, ideas without practical actions are useless, but we still need those ideas. Be less certain about things that we shouldn't be so certain about. There's aspects of environmentalism and sustainability that seem to have gotten lost. I did some search on the first Earth Day, and one of the themes was we're all interconnected. I think we lost that. We have to get it back. Reporters rarely cover sustainability, at least in the true sense. lot I could tell you about that, but there's no time for it. If you don't like the word sustainability, I know there's people on this call who don't, they like other words, fine, but it needs to be covered, big time. A few of these I said before. We need some academics to be involved in these European-centric fields that I've explored. For the most part, they're not. We're really missing a lot. We should be doing more pilots, which is a major tenet of those fields. Things that are super, super innovative, that are beyond what most people even think is possible. Try them out on a small scale. There's this whole thing in our field about giving people hope. And I have mixed views on that, but I think for those who need hope because they are suffering from eco-anxiety or they're prone to it, let's help them with some of the good news, but let's not, do what I think we did for too long, not talk about the urgency and some of the scariness that we're seeing. It's real. We need to do both for maybe a different approach for different people. Very, very quickly on biodiversity, which we doesn't tend to come up too much in this area, but there was an article in the Washington Post yesterday on penguins by a biologist. The world's attention seems to be related to can we keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius? But meanwhile, every day we are learning about thousands of species imperiled and going extinct. If our emphasis was on preserving the Earth's biodiversity, we wouldn't have a climate problem. But if we solve the climate problem, we're still going to have problems with biodiversity. So whatever we're learning and doing here, we've got to also do for biodiversity. And if I've done a good job here, you should have some conclusions and recommendations that I missed. Okay, next slide. Here I'm going to go very fast. There's a few other things I did. I just want to show you they're there. I have some more strategies that I came up with, how to contact me if you have some ideas for me. I'll take the crazy ones. For more information, I have a bunch of the sources, things I've written or worked with other people on, and a little bit about my PhD topic that I didn't have any time for today. Just go through the next slides very, very quickly, and then everyone else gets a chance to talk. More potential strategies. I don't think we're going to be able to get away from considering a carbon tax. I know some people hate it. I think we're going to need it. So let's at least keep it in our back pockets. To my knowledge, very few municipalities have picked up on Sustainable Jersey's Gold Star standard for energy. They really need to begin to. I think we need so many things to work in this area. Municipalities trying to become as close to zero carbon emissions as possible would be enormously helpful. DEP has only recently became interested in sequestration. That's great, and they need to take it seriously. There's a relatively new Office of Green Economy and Climate Change in New Jersey state government. It's a little bit insular in my opinion. They need to go out and meet with more people, and I believe they've just started to do that, so they need to keep doing it. Next slide. Contacting me with those crazy ideas. They don't all have to be crazy, but either. Next. And these are some of the articles that cover some of the points I made in more depth. And the next one. I think I'm done. Your turn. Questions, comments, suggestions. You all still with us?
Just to pop in, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to talk now, or if you want to put something in the chat. Harrison put in a YouTube video for resources for bike and non-bike related improvements to towns and city infrastructure, and why it makes sense to all people, not just people who bike. So if anyone wants to click on that and save that for later, that's there. But otherwise, go ahead with questions.
I have a question. Matt, hi. In your list, you skipped the more use of art. So I was curious about what you mean by that.
There are some kinds of questions that other people know the answer better than I do. And I'm betting you and some others have a good sense of that I could then claim for my own. So do you want to tackle that, or does anybody else on this call want to take a whack at how art could be more helpful to us in this challenge? I'm not totally ducking. I have some answers, but I'm
No, I
betting
just
someone
want-
has a better one.
I just wanted to know what you meant by that.
I'll get to that, but let me see. Dawn, do you have a suggestion on that one?
Well, I think as children, we know we love to create, and we've lost that ability because we were told, well, you don't sing right in music class, or, you know, what you drew there is not a real squirrel, it's a raccoon. I mean, literally these kinds of things have happened to my kids in school. So, you know, art is a way for us all as unique beings to express ourselves through all the different arts. And actually it's a healing tool so that we can get more in touch with who we really are and what our contribution to ending climate crisis. You know, that's a simple.
I'd like to add something. If I could add something.
Hey, hi.
Hi. Art is using a part of the brain that's not the linear logical part of the brain. And so it's a way of doing the nonlinear thinking. And if people were doing more art, there would be more insights, there'd be more information coming into what is produced that could open whoever's watching what's been done or whoever's done the creating of the art.
Conditioned attitude.
I hear another idea there.
Kind of like to build on that, Susan and Sharon. This is Kent Fairfield. I think we can go back to one thing that Matt mentioned earlier in terms of our Western preoccupation with facts and rationale and that sort of thing. And in the last 20 years or more, a lot of work has been done on our illusions about facts. There's an NYU psychologist named Haidt who's done a lot on this. And for many years, Daniel Kahneman, the famous psychologist and economist, Nobel winner, has basically said that we think we make our decisions based on the analysis, but there's an awful lot of evidence instead that we kind of think what in our gut seems right to us. Once we decide that, then we gather evidence to support that, almost like a lawyer trying to make a case after he or she's already decided what she wants. And what that tells me is we could spend more time looking at the non-rational, abstract things that get at feelings about certain things to help all of us think more seriously about behaving differently with a different mindset. And that gets around to art, where I think there's a lot of evidence that art can really move us. It moves our feelings. It can hit our thinking about in some kind of, oh my God, kind of way. Since I retired from my university work, I'm a social documentary photographer now, and my aim, which I haven't fully recognized, is to build on documentary photography that will bring out certain things that relate to people's pain, to ecological danger, to ecological good news, that sort of thing. And my kind of unstructured hope is that people say, oh my God, I didn't realize such and such was that bad. Or I didn't realize how many people are in gross, horrible situations around the world. And that may, when then put up next to what do we do about it, could lead people to more openness. It's a good word that Matt used, I think, saying, should we do things different?
Thank you, Ken. You said it so much better than I could, but Sharon, did your mother want to say something? No, okay. Okay, next question or suggestion?
I have a suggestion. Maybe it was, I came in late, I'm sorry, Matt. I stopped being so active in the sustainability genre field area a while ago and started being more active in the spirituality world and the world of quantum science. And they, that field seems to be promoting two things. One is the interconnectedness idea that you started to highlight, Matt, that there's a kind of a non-separateness, the separation that happened between the different classes economically, the different roles people play, and between humans and nature was a major disconnection that had people stop considering nature, the animals, the other breathers that we share life with. And so they're emphasizing for people to recognize the interconnectedness that we have, and that we happen to have these special capacities. You know, with more privileges and rights come more responsibilities, so that we have a role as a caretaker, as a trustee, as a custodian. And the second thing that they're emphasizing is the unique gift that each person is born with and gets squashed through our being raised and through the society that we have that is, so sorry to say, patriarchal and economically oriented. That we have a unique gift, and that's where people are encouraged to bring forth what they have, because there's that saying, what you don't bring forth will kill you, what you bring forth will, you know, be a saving grace. I'm not quoting it exactly. I'm sorry, somebody else probably knows the quote more exactly than I do. So they're encouraging the people to honor the light that they were born with and to bring it forth brightly, loudly, widely.
Do you think some of us have that potential?
The potential what?
Do you think some of us have that potential to grow in those areas?
I feel all of us can. All of us.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
I wanted to draw attention to something Stan put in the chat. It says he's got episodes. I'm not sure if that's a podcast or a show, Stan, but it's called Humanity Rising, and they're doing Cool the Planet Through Forest Regeneration. Is the episode tomorrow. He's got the link in there. Stan, I'll let you can talk about that.
It's a talk show. It will have several presenters, and we have a lovely little group of people who actively write into the chat, and after the show is over, we meet and talk.
On that topic, because I'm shameless about this, on that topic, our library actually recently just started a seed library. If you are in the area, you do not need to be a Red Bank library card holder to use it, but we've started basically collecting and handing out as many seeds as possible. It came from one of these programs, from the Gardens for Wildlife one, where they talked about doing a lot more with a pollinator. Like, we've got a bunch of milkweed in there. We have tried to get a bunch of native plants, native to New Jersey, and also food plants to kind of deal with like food insecurity stuff. But you know, I don't think we have any tree seeds in there yet, but we definitely have, like, you know, one of the things that was being talked about was trying to, you know, do rewilding in people's own yards a little bit and getting more of that. So if you are in the area, if you're nearby, unfortunately we are closed right now, but if you knock on the door, we'll bring seeds out to you.
Worth a visit. Anyone else?
I'd like to put in an extra word for the Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University. It's a daily program. I don't know if it's Saturday and Sunday. They're up on their 380th something. Stan, you could tell us what issue they're up to.
393. Tomorrow is 394.
So there's an archive of the past ones, and you could just look at the topics and then the speakers. That it's been a very shining, illuminating community of people that are putting out ideas. It's quite an idea bank.
How do people get access to Humanity Rising?
I put a link to the day pages, the listing of all Humanity Rising episodes into the chat. I can put it in again. And I put it in a link to tomorrow's episode, I believe. All episodes, yeah. Around 8:12, I put in all episodes of Humanity Rising can be found here. And you just click on that, copy that, that message, and you can get to all 394 episodes and a few extras that haven't happened. They're going to be Thursday and Friday.
Thank you, Stan. Does anybody have any ideas on overcoming some of these mental barriers?
I have a question, somewhat related to that, Matt, in that you mentioned at least twice where your students had never seen things, concepts that we of a certain age grew up with, and is of course. And what do you make of that?
I won't say because we're getting older.
Well, but why were those things eliminated?
Okay, I'll give you, there's a number of reasons, but I'll give you the one that has just happened. This is super
Okay, good.
current. As an adjunct, we don't usually take a lot of the courses that the university puts on for professors, but the semester ended, so I just took 2 in the last 2 weeks. And, on different tools that I wanted to pick up and so forth. And there was an undertone that I realized. Now, this was NJIT and a very well-known, school of technology. And I think the assumption that all the instructors of this course, again, as a professors, we were the students, kind of role reversal. But the assumption was that all of our students only care about practical things. And you don't talk to them about being, change agents. You don't give them tools for it. You don't talk about being a social entrepreneur. That's not what they're there for. But I think they missed the boat, and I told them this because the 6 or 7 courses I've taught at that university, when I bring these things up, yeah, it may be new to them, but there's always a good number that are interested, and they're pretty damn good at it. So, going back to your exact question, I think they've just never been exposed to it because they have these inherent strengths in technology, and I'm sure their math scores are much higher than mine ever were. So maybe it was kind of like a self-selected kind of thing, but I think it sells them short.
Yeah, yeah. I put on a Sacred Spaces kind of program, and my co-partner in putting this together, we feel like there's a huge hunger for some kind of spiritual, natural connection that young people are looking for, and they don't know where to find. They're not going to find it in the original religious dogmatic institutions, but they're hungry for it. So our programs, bring in experiences that touch on the humanity of each individual so that we can be more conscious and more able to deal with whatever climate crisis faces us.
Thank you, Dawn. Anyone else? Anybody from my network or not in my network?
Hey there, this is Harrison. I posted in the chat before around some of those video resources, which definitely recommend people taking a look at. Recent resident of Red Bank, just about a year and change now, and just really looking for kind of what you mentioned before, the practical ways to get involved in the community and really, advocate for that change. I think it's a particularly difficult concept as someone just entering a community and not really knowing the resources that are available and what it actually takes to incite change or even make a compelling argument, like you mentioned during your presentation.
And good luck. I hope you find it.
I do want to actually jump in there, Harrison, since you are in Red Bank. The Red Bank Environmental Commission does a ton locally. They've got the biking initiatives that they've done through town. They've installed a bunch of electric vehicle stations through town as part of, it's called Destination Electric. It's something that's run through the state. And it's actually supposed to try and get the town a little bit more geared towards electric vehicles. You know, with this program, they do a Earth Day thing. But if you, you know, I assume you had an email somewhere in there, but I'm actually just going to pop my email into the bottom here. If you want to reach out to me, I can connect you with the Environmental Commission if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely, appreciate it.
But yeah, we've, let's see, we also had, sorry, we had one more in there. Oh, Lauren pointed out that she's got organics recycling in Red Bank, and she's got a website on there, www.unwastemovement.world. That's another thing that's been also happening locally too, is they started doing plastic film recycling. Red Bank beat the state to the plastic bag ban a little bit, like I think a year or two ago, and it got plenty of pushback during COVID because people didn't want to, you know, all that stuff. But it's you know, now it's been in place for a little while, and they've also been like looking at ways of like, you know, disposing of more in terms of the recycling, because it's yeah, I mean, we did a program on kind of like how they've been having trouble like recycling stuff, because I guess China shut down buying a lot of the recycled products for a while, but that's not happening as much anymore. But they've got like a long list of ways that you can kind of, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle in there. Stan, sorry, I see that you have a hand up. I'll go ahead and let you talk.
Yeah, I have a question for Matt. I've noticed a long time ago, I noticed that children's games seem to have to operate as a standing wave. In other words, the 5-year-olds are doing one game, and then the next group of 5-year-olds are doing the same game. And the games have a tendency to flow through the ages. And the question about why some younger people aren't familiar with some of the memes that we are as older people, wouldn't it be possible that memes are also operate as a standing wave, and some people will get to find out about them, and it may not be age that controls the standing wave, it may be some other factor, but I would wonder if you have run across that in your research.
A few other people have mentioned that as an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm entering the phase where I have to do a lot of academic research. So I'm really hoping I discover something on exactly your point.
Yeah. It might be real, it might be something I just imagined, but
you're not the only one.
Okay, good. All right, so then it's probably somewhat real.
So, something I never do. Oh, Jill, I was thinking of you. Go ahead.
Sorry, before I'm sorry, Jill, I'll let you go in just a second. We do have Josephine asked in the chat. She wanted to know examples of like memes for this type of thing. If you have any examples of that.
I would say some of the cartoons I showed earlier, I think in my imperfect definition of a meme, they would qualify. You know, you could disagree, but the one where, you know, with the 4 people in a leaky boat, I would think, Stan, do you agree with me? Is that a meme?
Well, memes are, according to Richard Dawkins, who invented the term, memes are self-replicating ideas, are sort of, you know, along that line. So it could be a drawing, it could be a phrase, it could be almost anything, as long as people are perpetuating it.
And that particular visual I saw on Google Images has been replicated, but changes a little bit each time. So yeah, maybe it qualifies.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm thinking that creating memes for correcting the problems of our planet is probably the best thing that we can actually do. And if we can get certain memes that get people to think about certain things in certain ways, we might be able to affect change.
Hope you're right.
Sorry. I think we have time for one more question, so we'll give it to Jill, and then we'll close it down.
Jill has a lot of New Jersey experience too before leaving us.
So Matt, I know that you've been involved in organic gardening and farmers markets and all kinds of things. Have you found that the subject of food waste is one that is accessible for people to understand? It brings together the environment, carbon sequestration in soil, and economic issues, the loss of food and the economic consequences of that, and social science issues and social justice issues like food insecurity. Is that kind of a way to start talking to people about climate change?
Well, you already proved that it is. I mean, I remember some of the work you did when you were still at Rutgers and some of the events you put. And the other element, and it's not an insignificant one, a lot of the things we talk about are controversial. I don't think food waste is for the most part. So it's nice. Sometimes you don't want the fight. So yes.
So we've made it to the point where I have to shut it down, which is awesome. This is the largest crowd we've had since the start of COVID. So I'd really like to thank everyone for getting on. We've had a lot of Zoom fatigue. So this is great that we had this much of a conversation. We're able to stretch it out this much. If anyone, if you check tomorrow, I'll be posting this stuff, this entire presentation onto YouTube and onto our Facebook page. I believe if you've signed up for this event, you can use the same link for future events, but we do this on the third Tuesday of every month. We have something scheduled for February, but I need to confirm it before I can, tell you what it is on this. But I will send out an email and we'll post it on Facebook and on our calendar for next month. But I really appreciate Matt taking the time to put this together. And I thank you everyone for the conversation. And hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks very much, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.